So, this person's name on Discord is literally Doomer Nationalist, and they self-describe themselves as a fascist. So, pretty sure we got a gripper on our hands here. So, uh, let's go. Hello, Doomer Nationalist. How you doing, partner?
Hello?
Hey.
Hey.
Wait, can you say Sally sold seashells by the seashore for me really quick?
Sally sold seashells. Wait, what was the rest of it?
Sally sold seashells by the seashore.
Sally sold seashells by the seashore.
Okay. Alright. Just checking your audio. I had to get you to say like a long sentence so I could see when like the inflections in your voice get louder, whether or not it would peak into the red on the audio mixer. Well, alright. Since our audio is all dealt with, I assume I sound good on your end?
Yeah, you do. You sound fine.
No, thank you. Alright. So yeah, what did you want to come on and talk about today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about fascism. I saw your debate with that,
Nope.
or like your discussion with that one guy, and you said a lot of stuff that I disagreed with. So I was gonna ask you if you could re-say it for me. What do you think fascism is?
I think that fascism is a political philosophy and ideology that centers around an extremely strong sense of national identity, a sense of race and a sense of racial superiority or of racial identity, and adherence to it in some way, as well as a anti-modernist, more in favor of a traditionalist, going back to some mythical period in time where insert nation that's falling into fascism, I suppose, believes or has been convinced to believe was a better time than it is currently, and generally with the pinning or the scapegoating of a particular group, usually an ethnic or religious minority group, as a scapegoat for a selective populist scapegoat for certain problems having to do with the economy, because fascism does have a tendency to sort of appeal to people's populist sense of pro-worker ideology, but not in the contemporary sort of socialist or Marxist or communist way.
All right, so a few things first. Fascism is not political; it's a conception of life.
It
Like,
is absolutely political in every way, shape, and sense of the word.
It manifests politically, but it's first and foremost a conception of life. But now, besides that,
Wait, do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
let me finish. Let me make this up.
Okay.
You called it. You said it's racist, or it's inherently have some type of racial superiority. That's just absolute. That's just absolutely not true. The only fascists that actually cared about race or made it a part of their ideology were the Nazis. There were actually many fascists in Italy that completely rejected race. Racial fascism was heavily criticized by important fascists like Gentile. Many of the actualists within the regime completely rejected the idea of race existing. And there were also fascists in like different countries, like the Brazilian integralists, or even like the Peronists in Argentina, which pretty much said, since our country is so diverse, we will make that our national identity. Like the Brazilian integralists, their party slogan was to make Brazil a union of all races and all peoples. So the idea that fascism believes in some type of racial superiority isn't true. That's just something the Nazis added into their ideology. And I actually think that's why the Nazis had so much contradiction, is because they tried to add race into an ideology that was almost inherently not racial. And then you brought up being anti-modernist. I would actually argue that fascism is modernist, and also most historians like Roger Griffin and Nicholas Ferrell, like historians that studied fascist Italy and other fascist regimes, said that yes, it is modernist, and no, it's not traditional. They never wanted to return to some type of point. They actually wanted to rebirth man, have an actual revolution inside of a person to make another fascist man, almost like a renaissance. It was never about going back. It was always about going forward. Many futurists, such as like R.T. Marinetti, who wrote the Fascist Manifesto, actually he was a futurist. He didn't believe in the idea of going back, and fascists rejected the idea of going back. Mussolini famously said, "We reject conservatism." So I reject most of the labels that you called fascism, as it's just either ahistorical or just not true at all.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So, since you said you saw my previous video, then you are probably aware that I tend to subscribe more to the Umberto Eco's 14 points definition of fascism.
Echoes. Yeah, we can go over that if you want to.
Yeah, so the reason why I think it's more expedient to use a sort of a points list rather than like a hard like sentence-based definition is because when it comes to an ideology like fascism, it's so inherently it doesn't make sense. Fascism is a very emotional, reactionary ideology. I mean, it is. It absolutely is.
You give me
and
story
no, I don't have a source for it. Fascism is an objectively an ideology that makes no sense, an objectively reactionary ideology. We know this because of our views of history, the way that we've looked back at historical events. Now, the reason why I use Umberto Eco's definition is because not every instance of fascism is going to be entirely the same, right? So just like obviously Italian fascism under Mussolini wasn't super focused on race. Like, at least when I've looked into it, fascist Italy, there wasn't all that much like narrative or propaganda about race or identity or culture going around. Not as much as Nazi Germany, and yet we still know it to be fascist, and we still know Nazi Germany to be fascist. Just because every instance isn't exactly the same doesn't mean it's not fascism.
Echoes. Okay, so one of Echo's points, number 5, said that fascism was inherently racist. Like I pointed out to you, almost no fascist regimes besides Germany was racist. So why would you use that?
No, that's not true at all. No. I would classify many. Well, for starters, I'd classify much of the modern day Republican Party as fascist.
All right,
Not only that, though, I'd also consider many modern day like black separatist types to be fascist as well. People like in the Hotep movement or the black separationist types and whatnot. I consider them to be fascist. They label white people and sometimes even Jews as like a scapegoat for all sorts of problems they deal with. Their narratives and their politics are not that different from fascists. Just sort of replace, white people with black people, and usually they still talk about the Jews if they're, really into it. So it's almost, almost indistinguishable.
Okay, so first I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for interrupting. I shouldn't have done that. So apologies on my part for that. And second of all, Eco's points. Eco is a self-described anti-fascist, and he's not a historian. If you actually took Eco's points and you applied it just to the Italian fascists, the people who actually came up with the ideology, none of them apply. Almost none of them apply. Eco kind of took like reaction. He said, I don't even know what Eco did. Eco kind of like said he studied Italy, but he didn't. He was an anti-fascist, and Eco's goal was to make fascism seem as irrational as possible. And that's why I think so many leftists use it, was because their goal is to make fascism seem irrational. So you can say, this is a fascist, and make fascism a boogeyman, and actually try to loosely define it as much as possible. So you can just say, like you said, the modern Republican Party is, if all these people are fascist, then fascism means absolutely nothing, and you shouldn't even call these people that. But actually, if you look at his history and see what these fascists wrote, it actually is a very defined political ideology. The reason why you can say it's different is because
sure. If you think that, okay, it's fine. I mean, I don't think I'm going to be able to change your mind on that, so there's no reason to hound down on it. So if that's the case, if you don't think that what Umberto Eco is describing here is fascism, what is he describing?
I don't think he's describing anything. I think it's a bunch of loose defined points that he tried to say are fascist. We can go.
Okay, so wait. Do you mind if I just read these points off and then I'll let you speak?
I think I have them right in front of me.
I have them right in front of me as well. I just want to read them off for the audience.
I want to go over the first 3 with you and tell you how they're not particularly fascist, if you want to.
Okay.
The cult of tradition, the rejection of modernism, and action for action's sake. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I want to go over I think the first 2 tie in together, and then I think the third one is by itself. So I think the cult of tradition, the rejection of modernism tie in together. And then the anti-intellectual thing, I can address that separately. But I want to go over the anti-intellectual thing quick, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that cool?
Yeah. Very common with modern-day fascists, especially here in America.
What is anti-intellectualism?
Oh yeah, big, big,
Oh, well,
big, big.
it's actually funny because the ideologue of fascism, Giovanni Gentili, said this about anti-intellectual fascists. He said, "quote," and this is in the Origins and Doctrines of Fascism. "Quote: Anti-intellectualism does not mean, as some ignorant fascists seem to believe, that they are authorized by the Duce to dismiss science and philosophy. It does not mean that one denies the value of thought and those superior expressions of culture through and through express itself. Spiritual reality is a synthesis in whose unity one finds expression and value in that thought that is action. In the conclusive unity of that synthesis, and must converge, and know that they converge. Many elements without which that they synthesis would be empty, operating in a void." So basically, what Gentili was saying is that when he was talking about anti-intellectualism, he wasn't saying don't read, don't look into empirical data, don't do any of that. Philosophy and science is important. When fascists talked about anti-intellectualism, they thought anti-intellectualism meant the prevention of the synthesis between thought and action. They pretty much thought the only way thinking matters is if you put that political thought or ideology, or it doesn't matter, into action. So they saw intellectualism as stopping people from putting the thought into action, because most fascists were intellectuals. Like Gentile, he was a philosopher who cared deeply amount about education. He was the head of education in the first fascist regime. In fascist the regime, they took education and primary schooling very seriously. There was major building of schools under Italian fascist Italy.
Yeah, of course, but they're very selective about what they teach, right? Just like modern day fascists here in America, like the Republican Party, they've been for decades and decades pushing extremely hard to do things like, well, okay, this first one's a little bit more recent, at least in them being open about it, but the CRT thing, they're not just trying to ban whatever they think's like critical race theory is, they're trying to ban like the teachings of Martin Luther King and like the story of Ruby Bridges and stuff like that. Like even teaching that slavery existed, like that's the kind of shit the Republicans here in America are trying to ban right now from the schools. Meanwhile, like obviously climate change and evolution, they've tried to ban the teaching of that for a really long time. They've tried to snap down on the teaching of obviously sex education for children for a long time. Like this is just really, and obviously the Nazis did very similar stuff to this as well. The massive book burnings, the labeling of certain art as degenerate art if it was like too modern or pushed in, you know, anything pro-gay or too pro-progressive or whatever. Like I don't know, it just seems like the very selective viewing of what is true and what isn't in regards to science, the scientific method, and intellectualism as a whole. It just seems like it's very common among fascists to be very selective about, you know, what they're cool with and what they're not.
A couple things. I'm attacking the point that fascism is inherently anti-intellectual, and then we go, well, when the Republican Party is fascist and they're anti-intellectual. I don't think the Republican Party is fascist. You're basing that off of nothing. And also, there were plenty of fascists that actually said, who taught critical thinking, like Bumbati was a perfect example of critical thinking among young fascists. The whole point of anti-intellectualism was to teach these kids, or to teach, you know, these people under the fascist regime, is that you're not meant to just be thinking. If you're going to actually have thoughts.
Wait, this is a quote from Giovanni Gentile. Didn't you just quote him?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a quote from him. "Fascism combats not intelligence, but intellectualism, which is a sickness of the intellect, not a consequence of its abuse, because the intellect cannot be used too much. It derives from the false belief that one can segregate oneself from life."
Yeah, like, that proves my point. Say that first sentence again.
Fascism combats not intelligence, but intellectualism.
It combats intellectualism. The fascists thought intellectualism, the way we view it, and the way they view it, is two different things.
What did the fascists think intellectualism was?
I just described when I quoted Gentili, I just described what it was. They thought that fascism, or that not fascism, the fascists thought intellectualism was the prevention of the synthesis between thought and action. They believed in thought and action, not the rejection of thought just for action's sake.
That's literally what that is. When you throw out thought for action, that's action for action's sake. Exactly. Throwing out thought for action. It's exactly what
they thought. Intellectualism was preventing thought and action.
Okay, hold on. Wait, I have a question for you. Okay, so you don't think that what Umberto Eco is describing in his 14 points is fascism? No. Do you believe that this list of points fits the modern day Republican Party of the United States? For the most part?
Where?
Do you want me to go through every single point and draw a comparison? We did this with Trump a while back.
What can you DM me the thing? Like what criteria are you?
I mean, yeah, I can literally just like voice it now, like off the top of my head, coming up with examples from
Is
this
it
list.
Illy? Not Gentili. Is it like Eco's points?
Yeah, Eco's points. Yeah, I'm asking you right now. Do you think Eco's points line up with that of the Republican Party of the United States?
I don't think Eco's points are fascist.
Okay, do you think they're bad? Do you think like these Do you think these points, like a ideology that is these things he's describing, is bad?
I hate almost every point. Not only is it a bad take on fascism, real fascists would disagree with these things, like the cult of tradition. Most fascists didn't like tradition, like Marinetti or Diazano. Like these were people who believed in like the abolishment of marriage and like heavy gender, what we would call like gender ideology. Like these real fascists did not like conservatism. They didn't like what we would perceive as anti-intellectualism. They didn't like racism. They were mostly feminists. Like the things that that Eco said were points of fascism weren't fascist. It's ahistorical and is just trying to make fascism look bad as possible.
So here's the dilemma that I'm now stuck in. You're doing a good job of explaining. You're doing a good job of explaining why what you see to be correct is correct, and I'll give you a hand for that. The only issue is the thing that I have to point out, the elephant in the room, is that either you're wrong or the overwhelming like body of historical study and just the general consensus among people who've looked back at history seems to be that fascism is a far-right, ultra-nationalist ideology focused on some amount of racial or ethnic superiority or identity in some way many times. Like, it just seems like either you're wrong or all these people who seem to have over, the decades now seem to agree that, like, these particular groups are fascist, this is what fascism means. Like, it's either you're wrong or they're all wrong. And I just find it unlikely that... Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to name you a list of fascist historians who agree with me. A. James Greger, Zeev Sternal, Stanley G. Payne, Emilio Gentile, Renzo D. Filsi, Christopher Hibbert, Nicholas Farwell, Roger Griffin. All of these historians, the books that they've written, like A. James Greger, Mussolini's Intellectual, and Nicholas Farwell's his biography on Mussolini. All of these academics heavily... what they wrote in their books all contradict the 14 points. Farrell in his book Mussolini called fascism modernist. Greger said that the categorization of fascism as right wing is meaningless because not only is it just not true, the fascist regime rejected the terms of left wing and right wing. All the major academics on fascism disagreed with Eco's 14 points because Eco's 14 points were political. Eco was an anti-fascist. He didn't like fascism. Most of his points were just things that he didn't like, so he put them on fascism.
Okay, so let's say that historically, fascism is in fact a completely non-political sort of philosophy about the world, and whatnot, and what you're saying here is completely true. Do you think that even if what you've said here is all true, that perhaps because of the way that language works, that over the last few decades or 50 years or so, that fascism as it has been described has been sort of re-explained or given a new definition by so many people using it a certain way that coming on and making this distinction is kind of pointless?
No, I don't. Because two things. Well, hold on. Let me go over three things real quick. When I was talking about the academics, I misspoke. Some of the academics that I mentioned were like anti-fascist. They were just like historians studying fascist regimes. So I wanted to correct myself on that. Second thing, no, I don't think fixing like say you have historical fascism and fascism now, it means two different things. Yeah, that's because of like people like you and people like Eco who like spent like so much time trying to redefine fascism. So you partaking in something that I don't like is called historical revisionism. Usually most people don't like that type of stuff. I don't
think it's historical revisionism at all.
It is when it's very ahistorical and you're misrepresenting history into something that didn't happen.
I don't know. Every bit of research I've done into fascism in the past, including like the Nazi Germany especially, especially because I gotta debate a lot of Nazis on here. A lot of people come on and try to argue the Holocaust didn't happen, stuff like that. So I mean, like I've become pretty aware of all the writings and the historical like collection of all of that. Like the Nazi Party, I feel like the reason why usually when you say the word fascism, 99.9% of people will immediately imagine the Nazis in Nazi Germany in the 1940s is because it's such a perfect distillation of like the darkest sort of, I think, shadow of what these ideas, these what I would consider, but you would disagree to be, fascistic ideas can result in when given all the power that they could possibly want in terms of sort of enacting their policy. I don't know. That's why I'm like particularly outspoken against it. But I guess you disagree that this isn't fascism. So whatever ideology this is that I'm describing, that Umberto Eco is describing, that's what I take issue with. And I think the Republican Party and the Nazi Party and many people that I disagree with politically today, I think these points line up with them perfectly. And if fascist isn't the correct thing to call them, I would be interested to hear what you think would be the correct term for them.
Reactionaries, just conservative. I think what you just said, it sounded like a concession that Eco's points weren't fascist.
No, I'm still 100% of the belief that Umberto Eco's points are about fascism, but yeah.
Why? Because, like, most of fascist regimes, besides, like, maybe the Nazis, his points don't fit at all.
Whose points? Eco?
Eco's. Most of his points don't fit at all, besides, like, with the Nazis. They don't fit with Italy. They don't fit with Argentina under Perón. Like, if you take his points and you apply them to fascist Italy, almost none of them are none of them are gonna character Italy as fascist, and that's my problem. You take Eco's points and you can apply them to almost any political regime, doesn't matter what it is, and like 10 out of the 14 are gonna be considered fascist. Like, you take Russia, you take China, you take the USSR. You can make Biden a fascist if you apply Eco's points to him. You can make Trump a fascist. All of these. So once you do that, you're making the term meaningless, and that's very wrong because you think fascism's evil. So why would you make a term that you consider evil?
Okay, so you've admitted that the Nazis are fascist and that the Nazis fit these points. So what I'm curious about right now is why you still hold on to the idea that these points aren't defining fascism when all of these apply to the Nazis. All these apply to like what I would call modern day fascists, like.
They apply to they don't apply to fascist Italy. Fascist Italy, the people who came up with the ideology, it wouldn't fit Italy.
Ideologies change.
No,
modern day fascism isn't the same as what you've been describing. Absolutely this much. Like I brought up the fascism in South America Wikipedia area to like give it a bit of a read while we're talking, because I'm pretty good at speed reading, and it's already made very clear in the first few lines of the fascism in South America Wikipedia page that a bunch of other like thought has kind of impacted South American fascism, make it different from the European fascism that sort of started it all there. Like, the ideology changes, different ideas, like leftism or like communism or socialism or Marxism or whatever as an ideology, like these things have changed over time greatly. You know, like these ideologies as new thinkers come about, our technology, our general political, like Overton window moves around and shifts about from country to country. These ideologies change.
If you take the definition of fascism and you change it so much that no longer fascist Italy would be considered fascist, then that's no longer fascist. That's just a bastardization of something that you created to try to call fascist.
Oh, here's a good point from White Nervosa. Italy was self-identified fascist. Historians use the term fascist, a historical term to describe past governments. Nazis did not identify themselves as fascist. No government is fascist. They are acting like fascist governments. Ah, interesting.
Wait, the Nazis did identify themselves as fascist. Like an example of this would be like Hitler when he was in a debate with Strasser. He talked about how the fascists in Italy had given them a model to copy. So no, the fascists in Italy did heavily influence the Nazis, and some Nazis did consider...
Oh, well, that's well known, of course, but that doesn't mean that the Nazis called themselves, fascists. In fact, they called themselves National Socialists for a reason. A big part of that. A big part of that, the whole National Socialism in the name of the Nazi Party, a big part of that is actually, I believe that's point, hold on, wait, don't worry about it. I believe that's actually point 6 and a little bit of point 13. That's the appeal to social frustration and selective populism. The whole National Socialism part of it.
I'm gonna quote somebody real quick. Where is it? Where is it? All right, here's a quote real quick. It could be an anti-Marxist socialism, for instance, a national socialism. The millions of workers who will return to the furrows of their fields after having lived in the furrows of the trenches will realize the synthesis of the anti-theist class and nation. That's Benito Mussolini in his book, or in his paper, Traitocracy. Mussolini called himself a national socialist because the idea of fascism was a national socialism. The Argentinian fascists did the same thing. They called themselves national socialists. And also the idea that fascism is an appeal to a frustrated middle class. That's just historical revisionism. If I could quote, there was this newspaper. It was the most famous fascist newspaper, El Popolo d'Italia. In a note.
Wait. Okay, hold on. All right, I'm curious. Is there a single person in the Nazi government you can point to claiming to be like a fascist, like a single high-ranking person?
Let me think. I think Hitler actually might have called himself a fascist at one point. But the point is this:
Did he?
the
Well, no,
German
because
fascist. Whoa, 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 whoa.
it seems like typically. So for starters, you've listed a bunch of other nations and other like regimes as being fascist. I would need to do more research into those before I could like readily argue with you on those. But as for like the governments and the regimes that we've already talked about here, like you've already conceded. Like do you think the Nazi Party is socialist?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the National Fascist Party was socialist too. It was a national socialist. That was the whole point of fascism, a national socialist. That's why Mussolini called fascism a national socialism. The German fascists called themselves national socialists, and the Italian fascists called themselves national socialists. And the Argentinian fascists called themselves national socialists, and the Spanish fascists called themselves national socialists.
Okay, you're going off on a long thing there. I can't fact check all those things.
It's
But
true.
one thing I am very aware of, because this is a claim I've had to really just spend a lot of time researching in order to be able to debunk whenever I hear it. But the argument that the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, I believe I got the acronym right there, is socialist. No,
I mean,
Hitler himself wrote many times about his disdain for socialism and communism. Many other Nazi figures that were in power did the same. The Nazi Party itself had a very distinct anti-communist, anti-socialist policy. Communists and socialists were sent to the camps and were killed because of their political ideology. From my understanding and all the research that I've done, the pro-worker, pro-socialist, seasonally means production, rhetoric that came from the Nazi Party was entirely, as I said before, point 13 and point 6 of Umberto Eco's list, appeal to social frustration and selective populism.
All right, can I respond now?
Go ahead.
Most of the socialists in Germany were Marxist. The understanding of Hitler's socialism is from John Fichte, ethical socialism. Also, the idea that fascists just appealed to the middle class, it's not true. Like, you can look at the demographics of the fascist party. 25% were agricultural laborers, 15% were factory workers, 13% were students, 12% were tenant farmers, and 2/3 of them were veterans. So it wasn't just an appeal to like a middle class. Most of the people in fascist parties were lower class. That's an Italian statistic. The understanding of socialism from Hitler's perspective was not Marxist. It was a Fichtean socialism, and also you would know this, right? I mean, like if you read the Communist Manifesto, Marx even acknowledged that there were socialists before him, like the reactionary socialists. You had the utopian socialists. So there's other types of socialists. The reason why Hitler hated, and the same reason why the Italian fascists hated socialists so much, because they were internationalists, globalists, universalists. And they were waving the flag of the red instead of waving the Italian flag or the German flag, because they weren't loyal to Germans or the Italians. It wasn't because they were socialists. It was because they were international communist Marxists who hated Germany or hated Italy.
Amazing. All right, you gotta bring all of this research to like the headquarters of history collection, like where the modern day Library of Alexandria or whatever. You gotta bring this to them, okay? Because they'll be very interested to hear that actually Nazi Germany was socialist, a very well known to be debunked idea. And I'm sure they'll be interested to also hear that Hitler was a socialist himself as well.
You haven't. All right. Instead of appealing to authority and engaging in a logical fallacy, could you explain to me how Nazis weren't some form of socialists or Fijian socialists?
It just, for one, the rhetoric and the policy they enacted is, I mean, I don't think socialists. I mean, actually, you're not wrong. Judging by modern day lefty Twitter, I wouldn't be surprised if most like average like Twitter lefties would have a genocide of other lefties they don't like when they reach power. So you may have a point there.
I didn't say the Nazis were leftists. All I said is that they were. I said the Nazis were National Socialists, and all the communists.
Okay. So
they didn't kill him for being socialist. Oh, if that's true, then he would have had like Goebbels executed. Goebbels like described him. This is something that's not mentioned. Goebbels was a very left wing guy when it came to economics. Actually, Goebbels.
No, he wasn't.
He was. He described himself as a German Bolshevik and compared Hitler to Lenin. Goebbels was a very left wing type of guy, and the reason why Strasser was killed was not because Hitler told him to be killed or ordered Strasser's execution. It was because Himmler thought that Strasser was going to make a reach to Hitler's lead of the party.
So you believe do you believe that like the Night of the Long Knives is purely like a thing for maintaining political power, not an ideological ideologically motivated?
There's no proof that what you would call the economic leftists were killed because they were leftists. It was mostly purging or killing or executing or what's the word I could use? Exterminating the what's it called? What they deceived as like degenerates in the party. They thought they weren't loyal. The Night of the Long Knives was because Rome wanted to take the army under the SA. Hitler actually got angry that Strasser was killed. And also, if you want to keep going on the socialist part.
Wait, I'm curious. Do you believe what do you think the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea is in terms of like what kind of Juche?
Yeah, Jonathan Feach was an.
Do you believe it's a leftist like socialist government?
Who, me?
Yeah. Do you believe that North Korea is a leftist socialist government?
We're getting sidetracked. I just told you what North Korea was. They're Jucheist.
Okay. All right, I'm just curious. I want to see because obviously last time I debated somebody on this exact topic, they were very very keen to tell me that, and I think you did this as well, that fascism is not a political ideology or a way of organizing people in society.
It's first and foremost a conception of life. But also, I would like to get back on the socialist.
Wait, what does that mean? Okay, I have two questions for you. First, I need to know what that means. What you just like a conceptualization of life, I think is what you said. I need to know what that means. And
you know
two,
what that means?
I have a question for you. No, I want to know what conceptualization of life means to you.
Well, the fascists took a more positive, idealist view of life, and that was kind of the whole point, was viewing if you were going to be a fascist, you were going to have to go by the Mini Frago idea of life as constant struggle. You were going to be constantly batting in life in order to have self-improvement. Like, I wanted to go over my tenets of fascism, and probably the most important tenet is constantly building yourself up and improving yourself. It's a philosophy. It can definitely come into politics. I wouldn't even disagree with that. But first and foremost, fascism is a conception of life. Now, what was your second question?
So you said that Nazi Germany was fascist, and you also said that it was National Socialist. Do you believe that these things can both be true?
Yeah, absolutely. Mussolini described fascism as a form of National Socialism. That was the whole point. It was a socialism that was national. And they thought, and this is the reason why Mussolini left the Italian Communist or Italian Socialist Party, was because they were all globalists and he was a nationalist. That was the whole beef between the fascists and Bombazzi, because he was a globalist and they were nationalists and they wanted to find their own national socialism. And that's why the German fascists called themselves, the NSDAP, National Socialists.
Okay, I have a question. Do you are you American?
Yep.
Do you vote?
No, no.
Oh, you don't. Okay, so if you did vote, what party would you be more likely to vote for?
Probably Democrat.
You think so?
Yeah, like if you had like a Huey Long populist come about, then probably yeah.
Or what do you mean, like the QAnon populist?
No, not
What?
QAnon. Huey Long, Kingfish, the Democratic
Oh,
Louisiana.
okay, Huey Long. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All
Like,
right.
like if you want to go around like this road about like who's the real fascist, I mean, both of the parties are liberals. They're not fascists, but like the most progressive, like fascist president FDR was like had big connections towards fascism. But I don't want to get off the topic of socialism and fascism.
Yeah. What would you describe yourself as politically?
A generic,
I oh
yeah, like a generic fascist, like fascism with American characteristics. Basically, I'm going to put fascism to fit culturally in America and to fit the American people.
Do you think that the Nazi Party was like racist?
Yeah,
Do you believe Hitler was racist?
yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that the modern day Republican Party is racist?
No,
You don't?
I think they might be racist towards like white people, but like,
Wait, the modern day Republican Party is racist towards white people?
I mean, it could be. No,
Why do you think that?
I'm obviously messing with you. Now, where are you going with this?
No, no, I was just curious. I'm just a curious boy asking questions.
No, like if you want to look at if you want to look about the stuff I would have done, look into the New Frontiers, their party platform. That is what fascist. That's what a true third position fascist American government would do. So you can look up the New Frontier party platform. That is points that I would do. That is political
The
policy.
New Frontiers
Yep.
political platform, is that what you should Google?
Oh, the New Frontier political platform. Um, that's what fascism in America will look like policy wise. What I advocate for. If you're going to talk
Okay.
social policy,
Uh,
that's me.
so you believe in like the okay, so this is what it says on tell me if this is the wrong thing on Britannica.com. New Frontier, political slogan used by US President John F. Kennedy to describe his concept of the challenges facing the United States in the 1960s. Is this what you like?
Hold on. That's like the slogan they took. Give me like 2 seconds, and I'll like DM to you what I'm talking about. New Frontier. Give me like 2 moments. But like, go ahead and what you were talking about with fascism and socialism. About like, because you
I
said
don't
what
really.
about the fascists? What
Oh, I
about
don't.
weren't Fijian socialists?
I don't really think I had much else that I wanted to talk about, but I mean, if you have anything like any questions for me, I guess I'd be down to answer them.
Yeah, sure. Let me DM this. Where can I put this? Dude? Oh yeah, I see you. Here we go. Message. Here is the political. Like this is what fascism in America would look like. That's some policies. Um, but yeah. Why do you Let's see here. Um, what can we talk about? Oh yeah. Do you believe the Nazis weren't socialists because like they were like bought out by like big business and like they like privatized the industry? Does that
I
like
believe that that's part of it, but mostly I think it's that the Nazi Party never really had, or at least those that ended up coming out on top in the Nazi Party in the end of things. I mean, for obvious reasons, others weren't able to make it. I think more of it had to do with I don't think there was ever that much of a concern for the rights of workers to own the means of production or anything like that. I think more so,
what?
at least from my perspective, what I would call and what many others would call a fascist society usually comes about through like the ashes of a very disenfranchised feeling, economically sort of downtrodden group of people, society. Usually, fascism seems to arise when you take that downtrodden, economically disenfranchised group of people and you radicalize them through rhetoric that appeals to their sense of having something having been taken from them, right, and give them a scapegoat to blame it on. This is obviously textbook Nazi Germany with the Jews and everything, but I mean,
That's
it just seems
not.
very common with
That is
far right
not.
political movements.
Something had been taken from the Nazis, though. Like the reason why Hitler was so popular was due to the treaties of Versailles. Those bloody Anglo Saxons is
Did
what we can blame um those Anglo liberals are what we can blame World War II on.
Yeah, it's the actual thing you can blame. Well, no, you can blame world. Well, you can blame World War II on basically anyone who fought in the war for it to happen, but I
Are
don't think
you
you can
serious?
blame like the UK and like European liberals for the happenings of World War II. World War One happened obviously and resulted in Germany being put in a very bad economic place. But as far as the takeover of the Nazi Party and the Holocaust that followed, that more had to do with the political propaganda being pushed out by the Nazi Party during that time period to a German populace who was living in not exactly the best situation in regards to economics due to the debt and the horrible place that Germany had been left in after World War One, and of course the treaties that followed heavily punished Germany, and that just made the problem even worse. Now I don't know if that means that though the Treaty of Versailles is like the fault of the Holocaust is the Treaty of Versailles. That's fucking stupid.
That's
The
not what
fault
I.
of the Holocaust
That's not what I said.
is the nationalistic fascist, I would argue, and racialized rhetoric of the Nazi Party.
Well, that's not what I said. Of course, the Holocaust happened because of the Nazis, but the reason why the Nazis took power was due to the treaties that the English would put on Germany.
I mean, we can't like predict like we can't predict the future, you know, like of what or sorry, what would have happened in an alternate timeline where this or that didn't occur. Like we know that yes, the Treaty of Versailles and the losing of World War One resulted in the economic state that the Nazi Party rose out of, but like it's there's no point in
Yeah, you
saying,
can
oh,
say the
that's why it happened, and
you
that's
can
like
say you can say the say you can say the Nazis were like scapegoated Jews. I won't even disagree with that. But like, who did Italy scapegoat?
I don't really know what group Italy scapegoated, if any. I don't know if Italy's fascism was exactly the same as Nazi Germany's fascism.
You're right. That's why saying like all the stuff that the Nazis did, categorized as fascist isn't true because here's the beauty of fascism. It's organic. Would you agree with me that fascism is inherently nationalist?
Nationalist?
Yeah.
Yeah, generally.
So different nations.
I don't agree that it's organic.
It is organic because I'll explain how different
Wait,
nations.
what's organic mean in the
I'll,
context of a political like thing? Or I guess you would say it's not political. That fascism's not political. But what does that mean? Organic.
nationalists. So like in different nations, they're gonna have their own like views, social views. So like in Italy, it organically formed to shape the Italian people. In Germany, it organically formed to shape the German people, and they chose a more ethnic base, and they were also more reactionary. Because like I said, there's different variants of fascism due on the culture, because fascism is heavily culturally nationalist. So
Wait,
that's why.
wait,
That,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just got linked like a thing. Hold on. Wait. Sorry. Oh God, I'm misclicking like crazy. In a 1921 speech in Bologna, Mussolini. I mean, yeah, Bologna. Mussolini stated that fascism was born out of a profound perennial need for
Aryan
this, our Aryan and Mediterranean race. In
race.
this speech,
I know.
Mussolini was referring to Italians as being the Mediterranean branch of the Aryan race, Aryan in the meaning of the people of an Indo-European language and culture. Italian fascism emphasized that race was bound by spiritual and cultural foundations and identified a racial hierarchy based on spiritual and cultural factors. Well, damn, I admit I clearly hadn't done enough research on fascist Italy to be able to like correct you when you said that there was no racial aspect to it.
Yeah,
But
you're right. There
I mean,
was no
thankfully, someone
racial
in my chat
aspect.
got me.
Quote from Mussolini. The issue comes into play when you bring up racial views of Mussolini is because they weren't backed by doctrine. If we look any deeper, his constant because he had constant contradiction with race. He would say one thing about the Aryan race, but then he would also go on to say that 98% of race didn't exist. If you actually look at the political racism of fascism, It would be criticized by important figures like Giovanni Gentili and many of the actualists within the regime, people such as Italio Balbo, which was also like the possible successor of Mussolini, would take harsh opposition against it. And institutions like the CAUR would also take a harsh stance against any sort of racial understanding of fascism, and preaching in its universality instead. Throughout the Montreux Congress, which was pretty much like a fascist international, a series of discussion on racial topics and anti-Semitism would take place, all of them taking a critical stance towards the racism in German National Socialism. One of the main reasons as to why this Congress, hold on, the reason, the main reasons as to why these Congress would fail would be due to the constant infighting among its members. And also, like you can look at like other fascists, like Cornelio Calderano, who was the fascist in Romania. He even said, quote for quote, Mussolini is not anti-Semitic. And you can look at the lack of racial policies in Nazi Germany, because they didn't even start coming out. They didn't even start coming at racial minorities until like I think 38, after Germany started capitulating. After Italy started capitulating to National Socialist Germany. I actually think this is a quote by historian A. James Gregor, which is probably the most researched historian on fascism. Quote, fascist racism throughout the period between 1922 and 1938, however distinctive, was essentially begin and shared little, if any, substance with the malevolent racism so prevalent across the Alps. None of the major fascist intellectuals were racists of the sort one found in National Socialist environs. In fact, since many, if not most, of the principal ideologues of fascism were actualists, they had principal objections to attributing human behavior to material, that is, biological causes. They simply could not accept the proposition that an entire population categorized by an ill-defined racial traits could be held as a body guilty of anything. So while Mussolini had such some quotes about how like the white, like a paper he wrote, I think was called like the white race dying, maybe his individual opinions might have been somewhat racist, but they were completely lacked by any doctrine. And the racial policies passed in Italy were, most of them weren't even enforced. But they were all to like kind of capitulate to Nazi Germany. But most historians pretty much like Gregor, Griffin, Farewell. Most of them pretty much acknowledged that in Italy, fascism was not racial, and you had some people's opinions about race, but actual doctrine it wasn't racial. No.
Your Honor, when my client, Mr. Mussolini, dropped the N-word in Discord main chat, I promise he was just trolling, and I'd like to reiterate that my client, Mr. Mussolini, when saying that he was just trolling, said he was dead ass, Your Honor. So
Your cope.
as we can tell,
Big cope.
he I mean, is it cope when I read a quote from Mussolini talking about like having to preserve the Aryan Mediterranean race and how like the
Quote by
essence of
Is it another cope when I read a quote by Mussolini that said race doesn't exist biologically? And is it a cope when I read out a
do
quote
you
by
have to believe that race exists biologically? Wait, didn't the quote that I read from literally say that he believed Mussolini believed that race was like some spiritual thing? He didn't believe
yeah,
in
yeah,
like
exactly. Wait, yes, you're making my
yeah.
point. Mussolini contradicted himself a lot on race because most of the time he was capitulating to Nazi Germany or just general like racist thought. If you actually look at what historians said about racist fascism, like the quote I read by A. James Gregor, they weren't racist. You had a few quotes by Mussolini. He contradicted himself a lot with social views. But no, the fascist doctrine was not racist, and that's provable because I just read a quote. The policies that he even passed weren't even acted upon, despite the policies to appeal Germans. Like I'll try to find an article, but like Goebbels in 1942 bitched about how lax Mussolini was on like Jews.
You mean Goebbels?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Um well, all right then. It's been a fun conversation. We've been talking for about 48 minutes now, and I want to play some South Park, so I
Can I
think I got
make
to
one
wrap
more
up the
point before
combo.
you? Can I make one more point before you go?
Are you gonna say the N word?
No, I'm not gonna say the N word.
Are you gonna say any other slur?
Nope.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, based. Fascism was heavily socialist. It was heavily socialist, and when it took power, it was heavily socialist. They passed socialistic policy. There was actually land reform in Italy. Um, the number of landless laborers would go down from 2 million in the 1920s to 700,000 in 1940. Aryan production would increase through the battle of grain as well. That would eventually lead in 1921 to 1938. Farm workers without land would go from 44% to 28%, and there was actually very high nationalization rates in Italy. The Italian state controlled over 4/5 of Italy's shipping. Yeah, 4/5 of Italy's shipping and shipbuilding, 3/4 of pig iron production, and almost half of steel. So no, most of fascist Italy's policies were heavily socialistic. There was no privatization that happened after 1932.
Did the workers own the means of production?
That's not what socialism is.
Okay.
All right, great.
Go on.
I'm glad we had this discussion.
Me too. It's been a fun one. Have a good one, okay, buddy?
Absolutely.
Oh, he just left on his own. I didn't even like kick him or anything like that. He just clicked the button halfway through talking. Well, all right. There was 100% employment rate. There was a 100% employment rate in Nazi Germany. I wonder why. What is this? Anyway, what did we learn from that conversation, guys? We now know that good one, White Nervosa. Anyway, this is the thing that White Nervosa linked, by the way. Yeah, so we learned that fascism isn't political. We learned that the Nazis are socialist. We learned that that Mussolini wasn't actually racist because he has quotes where he talked about race being inherently like being part of our spiritual bond or whatever to our nation, and how he wants to preserve the Aryan Mediterranean race, but also he's not racist because he was inconsistent and contradictory, which I argued fascism was, but I guess that does. I don't even know, dude. That was a really interesting conversation. Like, that guy had so much shit ready, but like it seemed like every little thing that I looked into where he made a claim there really confidently, like after one Google search, it was really easy to find that he was wrong, like literally top link from like Googling it, like from like the talking about South American socialism to the Mussolini wasn't racist thing. Like it did not hold up well beyond like a 2-word Google. We learned Germany was nationalist and fascist. They were so nationalist they took Poland and were now Poland's citizens were German nationalists. Yeah, that was a really weird conversation. I think there's like a lot of people out there that like interpret political theory very differently, and it results in them sounding really fucking weird when they talk about very well recognized and understood political ideologies in a very different way